We're trying to get still and silent enough where we can hear that voice of wisdom speak to us from within, from without, from above. We need feedback. That helps us to solve the koan of our existence, and we don't have to do it alone. And life, if we pay attention, it will reveal to us where we are tight, where we're uptight, where we're stuck, where we're tense, where we can relax, where we should enjoy. The spirit of a yatra, a pilgrimage, is to be a pilgrim. And from the moment you decide to go on a pilgrimage, whatever the attitude of the pilgrim is, whatever arises is the divine. It's part of that journey. So when you set out to see the holy mountain or see the image of the deity in the temple, whatever arises on that journey is part of the tapasya, the austerity, the purification process, and the lila, the play of that deity. And so to live life as a pilgrim, we are journeying to have that intimate exchange of glances, the darshan of the self, of God, of the goddess. And to do a literal pilgrimage, it puts you in touch with that, the spirit of being a pilgrim in your life. So rather than life happening to me, where I am the victim of life, or this limited egoic self, known as Nataraj Chaitanya, is the cause of everything, what starts to happen is you can say, okay, life happens as me. Life happens through me. And when that starts to occur, we can drop the tension. We can take down the wall that we built around our heart, and there's a feeling of deep belonging and continuity with all of life as energy and consciousness.
Reality itself.
As Shiva Shakti.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CHITHEADS podcast. I'm Jacob Kyle, founder of Embodied Philosophy and host of the CHITHEADS podcast, and today's episode feels a little bit like a homecoming. This conversation has been about 10 years in the making. My guest, Nataraj Chaitanya, was there at the very beginning of Embodied Philosophy, when we were little more than a set of ideas, a few late-night conversations, and a dream to make the wisdom traditions accessible in a way that was both rigorous and alive. It was in fact Nataraj who came up with the name CHITHEADS, long before podcasts were the crowded landscape that they are today. Back then, it was a cheeky experiment to call this podcast CHITHEADS, in talking about consciousness, contemplative practice, and the human condition with just enough irreverence to keep things honest. As we say in the episode, sometimes you have to go through some shit to get to chit. In this conversation, we trace that spirit of play and depth across a really wide terrain. Nataraj shares his early story growing up queer in the American South, discovering mantra practice as a lifeline, and finding in Om Namah Shivaya a mantra that became central to his sadhana and to his life. We talk about sadhana as a lifelong experiment, how awareness and aliveness come together to yield bliss. We dive into rasa theory and the idea that an asana practice is really a kind of living theater, not just about anatomy and alignment, but an art of evoking both emotion and insight. We explore themes of devotion and non-duality, the dance of Shiva and Shakti, form and formlessness, love and awareness. We also talk about lineage, not as a hierarchy or an orthodoxy, but as a living transmission of wisdom, a mystery school that disassembles and reassembles the self. And we also touch on the spiritual potential of queerness, that beautiful in-between space, that liminal space where identity and transcendence meet, and where freedom begins to take on its own unique shape in you as you. Toward the end, we circle back to something that's been deeply alive for me lately, this idea of pilgrimage. Nataraj speaks about pilgrimage as a way of life, not just a journey to a sacred mountain or a temple, but a stance of reverent curiosity, a way that we can meet whatever arises as an expression of the absolute, as an expression of the goddess herself. This to me is a really perfect way of describing what we're trying to do right now with Wisdom School and Sadhana School at Embodied Philosophy. Wisdom School for many years now has been an invitation to live a contemplative life in the midst of our modern ones, to read, to listen, to think, to learn, and to let philosophy be a kind of pilgrimage of the body, mind, and spirit. Sadhana School then takes that same spirit into a deeper investigation of the non-dual Shakti-Shaiva traditions, which in and of itself is a pilgrimage to the very center of our true nature. As we enter this new season, this new year of Sadhana School, I'm really thrilled to share that Nataraj will be joining our teaching faculty, guiding aspects of the Sadhana School curriculum and helping us shape a new vision of what a truly embodied path of yoga and tantra can look like in the modern world in our time. If you're interested in joining Sadhana School, which enters its second year on October 22nd, 2025, depending on when you're listening to this, with an orientation that's scheduled for October 19th, just head to embodiedphilosophy.com and you should see a banner to click for more information. And you can also find it under the navigation if you click on the word Learn. As a devoted CHITHEADS listener, you can also receive an additional 10% off the tuition price with the coupon code CHITHEADS10. That's CHITHEADS, all one word, in all capital letters, and the number 10. And of course, keep an eye out for more information about our renovation of Wisdom School. Next year, 2026, will be themed on the theory and practice of pilgrimage, and we will be revamping the entire Wisdom School offering to align with what we see and what we're calling a renaissance of the humanities, a return to the humanities in its original spirit as a tradition of knowledge that cultivates clarity, wisdom, insight, and creativity through a heart-centered exploration of the world's various esoteric and wisdom traditions. So whether you've been a long-time CHITHEADS listener walking this path with us for years, or you're just finding your way to us in this conversation, welcome. We're so glad to have you. I hope this episode reminds you that the path itself is a sacred ground, and every step that we take is a gesture of devotion and commitment, and perhaps the destination that we imagine has been whispering to us all along. Without any further ado, here is my conversation with Nataraj Chaitanya. As always, thanks so much for listening. Well, blessings on this auspicious Navaratri, Nataraj Chaitanya.
Yes, deep blessings. Here we are, at long last, 10 years in the making.
Yes, yes. For those that are listening, I speak about this here and there, that Nataraj was with me, or rather we were together, I should say, when Embodied Philosophy started, and we had a lot of wonderful conversations, brainstorming sessions. Actually, the title of this podcast, which really, in the grand scheme of things, is the most popular public thing we did. Maybe not quite as much as it was when nobody was doing podcasts, but still, it's been an important piece of the puzzle at Embodied Philosophy. Nataraj made up the name for this, and I was like, that's amazing. Right. Didn't let him know I was stealing it, but here we are.
That's right. I want 10%.
Yeah, 10% do you remember? Of the podcast never made any money.
That's right, 10% of zero. Yes. Do you remember Danyadara Swami was like, you should change the name. You'll get the wrong audience. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. I've also had I've had someone send me an email once that said, I just love the conversations you're having. They're just so wonderful, but I just can't. Every time you say the word shithead, I hear shithead, and I just can't listen to that. And I'm like, okay, I guess you're not.
Those people are not your people. Yeah.
I'm like, I guess you're not an ideal audience. I don't know. I mean, if you can't get past that for the content, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. I think sadhana actually demands there are certain things you have to be like, I have to get off this because I want what's on offer. And this is it's the entry barrier. And it's like, oh, I can understand Leela. There's irony here. You have to have your sense of humor if you're going to do some sadhana. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've thought a lot about it over the years, and I wonder now if I was making Embodied Philosophy from scratch today. I mean, first of all, I think how political, social things have evolved, I would probably be a lot more scared about creating something like this. So maybe it's good that I was sort of innocent and ignorant in some ways. But I don't know if I would have launched a podcast on yoga and Indian traditions called CHITHEADS. I just don't know if I would have the guts.
Well, thank God you did. I mean, and it was always Embodied Philosophy, then called Five Tattvas, remember? Like, was always so process focused. It was about like really engaging with the practices and understanding that like On the one hand, you're on the path, so something marvelous has happened, and that cures something inside you existentially, but you still have to go through some stuff. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah, you have to
I
go
think
through some shit to get to
some
chit.
shit. Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I think that's this like and remember the first articles are even about mapping the fool's journey of the major arcana in the tarot and finding that as an
Yeah,
entryway into the philosophy of yoga.
yeah. Yeah, I actually think that's a really good idea. I've thought sometimes it would be nice to go back to that because to give some context, Nataraj is talking about the major arcana of the tarot if people aren't familiar. And it's kind of it is hard to imagine doing a major arcana inspired series, but actually it was kind of brilliant and also draws people into an orbit they may not otherwise know about, that is, i.e., yoga philosophy, through something that people are obsessed with, like tarot, right? And this was always kind
Yes.
of the part of the vibe was to sort of draw people in through something that might feel a little provocative. Like Shitheads is a provocative title. Like, what the hell is that? It sounds like Shitheads. Maybe we should check it out. And then tarot. Oh, I'm learning about the eight limbs, but I went in because I'm a geek for oracle decks or something that had that sort of spirit. But I like this idea of going through shit to get to chit. I feel like I need to weave that into the sort of intro to the podcast somehow.
And part of that is very tantric. I think there is a tantra offers us good narratives and rich symbols, and the journey of the individual in that process of self-actualization is so present in the fool's journey of the major arcana. And so in the weird Venn diagram of Eastern wisdom traditions and the divination of the tarot, that's where they meet in the middle in that yonic space.
Yeah. Yeah, you've always been really good about stories. In fact, this is I didn't really think to talk about this, but I like this way into the topic of sadhana that we were talking about discussing today. But I just wanted to say to start out that one of the things I really took away from my and have taken away from my relationship with you, friendship with you, has always been the inspiration of someone who was in very deep sadhana and dedicated to it. And my sort of inbuilt inclination towards that kind of seriousness was really supported by being around you. I mean, you demonstrated a kind of devotion to sustained practice that I hadn't seen up until that point in my life. And I think had I not been with you at that time, I don't know how deeply my own meditation practice that I had discovered, as you know, from Paul through Blue Thread Yoga would have grounded itself. So maybe this is a separate question than the question around stories that I want to ask you about. But what was, let's go back actually a little bit. What was the earliest experience where you discovered the kind of fruits of sadhana and the impact of sadhana in your own life?
Well, I was born in Virginia, and I was an obviously gay kid in a southern state, a conservative state. And I was in middle school at a Catholic school. Even if you just have any one of those ingredients together, it could be a rough upbringing. But I think the mixing of those three things together for me was a recipe for disaster. And so when I was a teenager, very young, I tried to take my own life when I was, I think, 12 or 13. And just because I felt so alone, I felt so isolated, I felt I was the problem, because that's what was being sort of reflected back to me. Being gay, being different, being othered in some way made me the problem. And at some point, that the year following, my best friend's mother, she gave me a mala and a book on prayer beads throughout world spiritual traditions for my birthday. And inside of that little kit that came from Barnes and Noble, the mantra Om Namah Shivaya was inside of it. And it said Om Namah Shivaya meant, this is very cute now that I look back at it. It doesn't really capture what the mantra means, but it spoke to me. It said that the mantra Om Namah Shivaya meant salutations to that which I'm capable of becoming. And
I've always
so,
loved that. I've always loved that translation.
well,
Even in New York, you would use it.
yes, well, it offers us a possibility of a different narrative, actually,
Yeah.
that we're not who we were, and we are not yet who we are meant to be. We're somewhere in this journey of unfolding, of becoming. And doing the practice of japa on that sandalwood mala that I got for my birthday was a way of sort of reeling in a life where I felt safe and loved and accepted. And it was a living symbol. And it really pulled me out of that feeling, that pain, that real psychic pain of isolation. And I started to realize, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just in the wrong environment. And I was like, we got to get out of here. You know what I mean? Like, I can't live the life that I want or am meant to live if I'm in the wrong environment. And so then I started to put all my energy into getting out of Virginia. By some chance, I came into contact with really great yoga teachers who practiced the full system of yoga, who were disciples of a real master of meditation and yoga, Swami Satchidananda. And it was by their encouragement that I spent time in his ashram, and then eventually moving to New York, connected with the tradition of Baba Muktananda, Siddha Yoga. But yeah, it was because I found people who were plugged into real time-tested knowledge who said to me, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. And you're going to think some things, and not all those things that you think about yourself or your life are true or useful. And some things should be questioned, some things should be renounced, and other things like virtue should be cultivated. And here's the system. Here's the whole meal. And that was really life-saving. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. It was, I wish more kids heard that growing up. Little Jimmy, you're going to think some things growing up. And they are not going to be true. You should be seriously suspicious of some of your own thoughts and emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that kind of exposure to these individuals who were giving you a different glimpse of what was possible, as I was touching on, I feel like one of the things, I'm better at telling stories than I thought I was, but I've always admired your kind of way of telling stories, and it helps to ground really esoteric teachings to actually have them embodied in these narratives. So how do you feel the role of stories plays into kind of the path of sadhana? I mean, you were just talking about how the foolish journey, people, we have to see ourselves as sort of in this kind of hero's journey in some sense, or some sort of like arc of sadhana. And that seems to be something that people don't like to write their own stories in that way, it seems. So how does that help with connecting to sadhana?
Yes, I think at some point, people started to ask those perennial questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What gives my life meaning? What happens after we die? And in courting the mystery and trying to explain the unexplainable, only art could really do that. And art has a narrative, often will have a narrative structure. And so we had to dance it and paint it. And we had to tell stories that were filled with allegory and metaphor and simile and rich symbolism that was nourishing for the mind, to express a longing that we couldn't necessarily conceive of otherwise. And the amazing thing about the narrative is that it has the trika inside of it. Good storytelling, it appeals to us as emotional beings, as thinking beings, and as dynamic, doing, living beings. And so the quality of our life is actually dictated by the story that we tell ourselves about our life, about what's important, and about our relationship to others.
This is actually bringing up a really interesting polemical point that I have. And so let's talk shit about the yoga community for a moment.
Absolutely.
You know, I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. You know, again, I'm going to put a caveat, an asterisk against everything, because of course, but just to be polemical for the sake of being polemical, you know, one of the things that we've observed, right, in the yoga community over the last, however many years, is the idea that going deep in yoga is just very hyper fixated on anatomy, to think of the yoga's aim as being health and wellness. And so we need to get as sophisticated as we can around therapeutic concepts, you know, trauma studies. And I'm not denying the importance of these things. But in one of the things, especially as have become so interested in rasa theory, is that I now kind of see even an asana class or some sort of sequence of sadhana as being a sort of play, as a sort of drama that is meant to evoke a particular emotional experience. And so, but we never talk about that in or we do maybe, But in the broader yoga community, there's not this discussion. I mean, I remember when, what's his name? Matthew Remski started writing that book. What are we even doing when we're doing asana? And it's like, it's looking for an answer to the question and the specificities of the alignment, when all of this alignment, all these sort of gestures and postures are honestly, to me now, more like the elements of a dance or the elements of some sort of artistic architecture that ultimately is designed to evoke a sort of a sentiment that then takes you closer to self in some way. So that's obviously a very summary overview. But I wonder what you think about this, and also how this would connect to what your own critiques are. Not to say people shouldn't do yoga in whatever way they want to, but what are your critiques of the general yoga world and how actually it is absent of, and maybe I'm making an assumption here that you'll think this way, but it is largely absent of sadhana in terms of how we want to propose it?
The Hatha Yoga practice is really trying to offer us a possibility of something. Firstly, the tradition, it has a very wide and broad, all-encompassing view of the divine. And there is a form of the divine that embraces everything. There is a form of the divine that has become all things, and there is a form of the divine that embraces us from within. Our self-concern and identification as a limited egoic self, thinking we're just our body or just our thoughts or just our emotion or just our history or just our trauma, is one of the main ways we cut ourselves off from experiencing the divine at any of those three levels. The divine within, that's become all of the material world and embraces all things. Inside the asana or real practice, you have a chance to experience yourself as more than just a body, more than just a thought, an emotion, to feel yourself as spanda shakti. When we can, if you've just fixate on the construction of the asana, it's like going to the movie theater or the theater on Broadway, and instead of actually going into the theater and watching the play, you just watch the building. You've actually missed the point. We've got to go inside and then watch the dance of life that's going on inside of us every single moment. The shimmer of subtle movement, of Spanda Shakti. And she expresses herself ceaselessly in the rise and fall of those thoughts, emotions, sensations, moment to moment. And when we start to feel ourselves as that movement, it changes our identification. So rather than life happening to me, where I am the victim of life, or this limited egoic self, known as Nataraj Chaitanya, is the cause of everything, what starts to happen is you can say, okay, life happens as me. Life happens through me. And when that starts to occur, we can drop the tension. We can take down the wall that we've built around our heart, and there's a feeling of deep belonging and continuity with all of life as energy and consciousness,
reality itself,
as Shiva Shakti. When you can learn to feel yourself as energy, I mean, ultimately, our practice as Shaiva Tantras is to rest in awareness as awareness. But until we can do that, we can feel ourselves as energy. We can feel ourselves as aliveness. And so a huge part of real sadhana is the conscious rejoining of our awareness to aliveness. And when we can bring awareness to aliveness, either in the yoga posture or the pranayama practice or with the mantra or with the dharana or whatever, the result is there's a blossoming, there's an expansion. We get in touch with ananda rasa, the nectar of bliss. You see, so this simple formula, this awareness plus aliveness equals ananda, is the thing that I'm most interested in encouraging inside of yogis, particularly inside of Hatha Yoga, because we're so underexpressed and we're so not present that we're missing this moment where all the juice is.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, because it reminds me of something that I remember Harish said once, that everybody's talking about Shakti, like we need the divine feminine. And of course, on some sort of socio-political level, the whole kind of embrace of the divine feminine is sort of healing, right? But at the same time, if we think about the esoteric symbolism of it, we're also, Shiva is sort of the stillness and she's the dynamism. Shiva's kind of the container of equanimous consciousness, and Shakti is like everything, all manifestation. And his point was, actually, we need more Shiva, not in that we need man. It's not a patriarchal thing, but saying actually we need this sort of silence. So I wonder, even within that embrace of the diversity, how you teach or how you connect with your students about kind of the need for, how that relates or how that cultivates the stillness that is sort of somehow necessary to kind of at least see oneself reflected back as the self in whatever, diversity they're experiencing.
Yeah, I think initially we start to notice the movement of our inner world, and our initial tendency, at least my initial tendency, was to make meaning of every single movement or latch on to the particulars of every movement. But
which
when
is kind
you
of
just
conspiratorial in a way. It slips easily. We should talk about that later.
But instead, if I just focus on the movement itself rather than the story or the meaning I'm applying to it, that has a sort of lulling, down-regulating thing. And what starts to happen very naturally is that you start to slip into the space between things. There's a sort of liminal space is revealed, which is why we say the breath is so useful, and the tantrikas, they extol the power of the breath, not because of the necessary movement of the breath, but as you pour your awareness, which is a form of your love, inside of the breath, a secret third thing arises, not just the inhale and the exhale, but the subtle pause at the top of every inhalation and the subtle pause at the bottom of every exhalation. And as you start to, you don't even have to manipulate or control that space, but as you start to just shine the light of awareness on that space, you start to be in touch with a stillness that's even inside the movement, that sort of has like a bleed over into the movement. And you still feel inside that still point, it's dynamic, it's full of energy. Vijnana Bhairava says the Shakti ceaselessly expresses herself as bharita, supernal fullness, inside the space between the breath. So there's something about movement leading us to stillness, and stillness moving, like stillness moving, emptiness dancing, So there's, it's very intoxicating, but we have to sort of, it has to be felt rather than thought about.
Yeah. Well, I might disagree with you there on there being a radical distinction between feelings and thoughts, but we'll leave that for another day. This goes back to our long-standing, what would we call it? Would we call it a tension or a disagreement about the
head and the heart?
The head and the heart. So Nataraj and I, as I mentioned for the listeners, were in a relationship for 3 years, and the first time we ever taught together, and by the way, Nataraj was teaching yoga philosophy many, many, many years before I was, and I was sort of a blithering idiot by comparison to his wonderful oral skills. His oral skills. And let's just let that lie. We'll just let that lie there with no interpretation. And we did the head and the heart, and because I was obviously even then quite intellectual, and Nataraj is very heart-centered. But I do feel like we have both sort of healed our rigidities on our judgments of the other over the years, and that's obviously been quite healing. So anyway.
That's right. The yoga is working. The yoga is working. The thing is, the mind well used will take you beyond the mind, and the heart well used will take you beyond mere sentimentality. And that's what a gift.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, and I will admit, obviously, because the point is that, especially in the Tantra tradition, that yes, it's not about the mind being wrong. It's like, what kind of thoughts are you thinking? Like, are you thinking the thoughts that are contracting you and sort of taking you away from this ability to pour love into your breath, right? Like, if you have these ideas and preconceived notions that love can't operate like that, like, you need the very idea that it can, and you just gave us the idea. So it's like, that's sort of how, anyway, I try to kind of think about it when I'm trying to explain these things as well. But to go to devotion, because I think this is it's a important topic, and I certainly have become, I used to get so, I would bristle at the kind of sentimentality of particularly the Vaishnava bhaktas. But now I've really, opened up a lot more to this. And I know you have lots of thoughts on it because it's always been central to your practice. But when you're talking about pouring your heart into the breath, this brings up for me when you're speaking about this, like what kinds of things we can pour our heart into. Like some people might need something besides the breath, because love is something we associate with another being. So of course this then brings up like the role of deities or divine archetypes, or however you want to think about it, into the process of sadhana. Now you're clearly, over the years, you and I have both, one of the auspicious things about our friendship is that we've both kind of gone much more, very deeply in our own ways, but deeply in the same direction in some sense. So sort of the same kind of group of traditions in Shaiva Shakta or Shakta Shaiva non-dual tantra. And so you have this non-dualistic perspective as far as I understand it, but you're still very much a bhakta in the way that you relate to the deities. So how do you talk about when people ask you about the deities now, situated within this non-duality where ultimately they're all expressions of the same thing, how do you talk about the relationship between the forms and the formless?
Yeah. Well, first, it's a devotional non-dual tradition that I'm practicing inside of, and our love is always a movement towards oneness. Mm-hmm. So when you are in the state of oneness, you just have to abide in that state, and nothing more is required unless you're just doing whatever it is that you're doing. But when you are feeling lack, limitation, separateness, suffering, you can use your love as a vehicle. The supreme power inside of these traditions is Chit Shakti, the power of our own consciousness. And essentially, whatever we turn our awareness to, we're worshiping. And that it is a watershed moment for a practitioner. At least for me it was, because around our old apartment, there were lots of little altars everywhere and lots of photos of saints and gurus.
Loved that apartment.
Everywhere. But because it was a way of invoking what mattered most for me, and I don't want to worship at the altar of my problems or my fears. I want to remember what's truly important. And for me, it's my highest value. It's the divine. And so lots of times people are unconsciously worshiping at the wrong altar, you see. Yeah. And so when we use things that are charming to the mind and, enlivening to our heart, and we start to connect with them in a deep, honest way, it speaks to our relational nature as human beings. The suffering really happens in monologue, but healing happens in dialogue. And so to put myself into those relationships with forces of nature, with archetypes, with energy, with deities, and to give reality a personality was something...
Whoa, give reality a personality. I have to write that down.
It was very deeply healing for me, because it meant that I could work on improving the relationship of all things, or engaging in those relationships in appropriate ways so that they uplifted me rather than impoverished me in some way. And the devotional tradition, it holds that there are sort of classical bhavas or attitudes, relational models that you can have towards divinity. That there's the dasya bhava, that you could be the sort of lord and servant, the vatsalya bhava of parent and child, where you could be the parent or the child, and the divine could be the child or the parent, the bhava of friendship, of equality, and then the kanta bhava of lover and beloved, or the guru bhava, the guru shishya bhava of student and teacher. And if there is a moment in your life where the relationship feels blocked, or there's a block in the situation, it might mean I have to shift my bhava. Because this person, in my own life, I play many parts. I am a yoga teacher, or I am friend To some, I am partner, to some, I am this or that. And so sometimes we're playing out the wrong script, or we're in the wrong mood. And so just understanding that you could shift your temperament, your identification, or the role just to make the relationship work, it brings a kind of solutions-focused ability to your life, because you've made it a person, or relational.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on that, because I think it's a really important point that you're making, and it very much kind of connects to how I feel. I don't know if I resolved this, but I just had this experience of recognizing that I was indeed giving it a personality, and actually the power was in that, not in recognizing that it already had a personality. And this is sort of hard for me to tease out, and someday I feel I want to kind of, because I think it's a subtle point that touches on the way in which, reality is fundamentally creative, and, particularly in the Pratyabhijna and the kind of non-dual philosophy, it's fundamentally creative. We are cosmic actors, cosmic performers and artists, and we are the divinity. And one could say, well, choosing to give it a personality is just a fantasy. You're doing that. But really, actually, by giving it personality, you're bringing it into being, right? You're bringing it into being because...
You're invoking something. You're calling it out, because it exists in sort of subtle form there. But when you do this kind of work, you're calling it forward.
Yes. And what are the pragmatic impacts of that? Like you're saying, you're recognizing that by giving reality a personality, which I love the way that just flows off the tongue, is it exerting an effect that bears fruit in your own sadhana, in your relationship with others, obviously in your relationship with perhaps Mother Nature.
Yes, well, it means that there's a way into loving relationship with my life, however it's presenting. And it drags every single part of my life onto the path. So there's nothing that's excluded from the yoga now, because, just like the hymn of the Devi Mahatmya, it says, Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu blank Rupena Samstita, and it lists all these crazy things that would be surprising to someone who has a normal, quote unquote, normal idea of what spiritual is. To think that our hunger, our thirst, our sleep is the goddess, our bhranti, confusion, even our confusion is the goddess. And instead of you being confused or in a state of suffering or lack, that something has gone wrong, to say, oh, actually, this is proof of God. That we're learning to relish life in all of its states and recognize the goddess as inside of everything, as everything. And that includes you too. It's such a all-embracing view of what spiritual life actually is.
Yeah, and I think when some people hear this, at least this is my kind of imagining of the kind of immediate reaction, is that, or in some kind of misunderstood way, that this means that if everything is the divine, then we just have to let it be, right? But actually, what is in there, what you're describing, is that in the shift of the relationship, there's a shift in your perception of it, and actually a kind of relinquishing of the potency or the some aspect of the contraction of that confusion or discomfort or what have you.
Totally. And the narratives are actually so important here, because when you drag your whole life onto the path, it's supposed to call us into action, not to make us a doormat, to be, oh, everything's God, so why bother? No, we're dynamic, alive, living beings. And the path also offers us several different sort of upayas or methods based on our identification and our inner state at various moments. The highest attitude is Chaitanya Matma from the Shiva Sutras that says everything is consciousness, or the Kularnava Tantra, which says Na Shivam Vidyate Kvachit, nothing exists that is not Shiva. To think the whole of life is made of divinity, sublimity, auspiciousness, it's a very high octave view of your life. But the reality of the situation is, I can't hold that vision all the time. And so what then? Well, okay, kid, try this. And then the next rung down, because we always start with the highest. Because sometimes we can just relax into that highest view. And of course we feel when we look at a beautiful sunset, or you have a delicious meal or a fantastic orgasm. Of course it's easy to believe those things are auspicious and divine. But then what happens when we're in our pain? Okay, well then the tradition says, think of your all things as sadhana. Connect with mumukshutva, your longing for liberation, and hold in your heart a deep wish to grow. And if you can honestly cultivate this deep desire to grow no matter what, all of life will be nourishment for your growth. You're outside of the axis of win or lose, gain or loss, pleasure and pain. It's all just nourishment for growth now. It's all part of my path. It's all part of my unfolding. It's all part of my awakening, you see. And then if you can't do that, well, what do? Okay, well, remember that someday this body will be a dead body. Remember impermanence. None of these problems are going to last forever. Someday every mountain will turn to dust. And so the fact that we have these different levels of the view that offer us different narratives help us to free up our energy, our resilience, our creativity moment to moment.
Beautiful. Yeah, that kind of brings me back to the sadhana question, which you're talking about. I feel like there is, again, just to kind of, I love to bring it back to sort of misunderstandings or assumptions. And there's a lot, I feel there's a desire in the general kind of spiritual world that is socialized in us by our culture to seek out a quick fix prescription. People start a meditation practice, they don't bear fruit immediately, or they experience shit and not shit. And they're like, get me out of here, you know? And what you're describing as the kind of just the way in which sadhana becomes fully integrated into your life, it's like an ongoing experiment. I want to hear what you think about this kind of idea of the relationship between experimentation in sadhana and also the need for a kind of sustainment of, remember we were together, you did 40 days of Lakshmi Yashtakam, and then you inherited a bunch of money.
Not a bunch, but a little bit.
Well,
for that time, it was a lot. Yeah.
For that time, yeah. For two people that had absolutely zero money and were, living full-time yoga teachers in New York, it was a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will not even commit to that. So how do you balance that? Sometimes you're committing yourself to something and it really isn't actually working. It's not right for you. It's not the right practice, whatever. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that, the relationship between those two things?
Yeah, totally. I think because reality has a personality and she or he, it has become all things, we're always being given feedback by our body, our mind, our energy, and our circumstance. We're trying to get still and silent enough where we can hear that voice of wisdom speak to us from within, from without, from above, and we need feedback, that helps us to solve the koan of our existence, and we don't have to do it alone. And life, if we pay attention, it will reveal to us where we are tight, where we're uptight, where we're stuck, where we're tense, where we can relax, where we should enjoy. But the point in it, I like how you use the word experimentation. It's also, it's about experimenting, but it's just about experiencing also. That supreme power in the universe that has become all things went through a very specific process of limitation to become Jacob Kyle. And so she didn't do that in an arbitrary way. She did that in an intelligent way. And it's so that you, Jacob Kyle, could offer her an experience that only you could have. And we're just trying to get on board with that process, and so that we could play our part really well. To support us in that, we need sadhana. Mm-hmm. And it's really useful to work with time-tested practices that we have the receipts on, like how they work, how they affect people. And we have that in lineage, We see that, okay, there's a sample group of these people, and if they all do this practice in this way, with this view, they arrive at this fruit. So there's sort of practice, view, and fruit. And they're all in the mix. They're in the masala together. And our practice is really a depth over time equation. We have to do practice for a long time. And because we're building a relationship. with it. And we don't really have deep intimacy until we've seen each other in all our variety of states and karmic conditions. What's it like to chant when you don't feel like it? When you're bubbling over with love? When you're full of despair? When you feel dead inside? You know? And it's your continued returning to that one thing that it builds a center of gravity inside of you. It purifies you. It removes obstacles. It invokes grace. But it's a process of slow gains. And it requires continual fine-tuning and adjustment. Like you have a core sadhana, and then over time you might add in sort of sankalpa sadhanas or refinement practices that adjust certain things that are happening age to age or era to era in your sadhana. And it's really hard to see behind you. It's hard to see your own shadow. And so to have the sangha or the satsang or the guru who can help see what's behind you and say, oh, hey, I believe you to be the self. I believe you to be Shiva. And when you say this or do this, you're not being who I know you to be. Why don't you adjust the practice in this way? Why don't you adjust your understanding in some way? Why don't you try this? You see? And so we help each other in that way.
You mentioned lineage, and so I want to kind of ask you to speak more directly to that, because this is one of... I can't remember if I was against lineage. Remember when we did our first tantra workshop, when I prepared a binder full of preparation, because it seemed impossible for me to speak for it for 4 hours, and therefore I needed 3 books of preparation, and you weren't particularly thrilled. I remember a question coming up during that workshop about a teacher, and I this is sort of connected to lineage and maybe not, maybe they're 2 separate questions, but maybe you can tackle them both. I had said that I didn't really feel like, I had many teachers and I learned something different from each of them, but I never felt I had my teacher. And then, I met Paul, and that was a very specific kind of experience of depth of sadhana through a teacher. And that then really kind of brought me into what I felt was a lineage and experienced that. So, obviously lineage, I want you to get into this. I'd love for you to speak about what you've experienced as people's misunderstanding of lineage, and then from that say how it's, why do you think it's so important today? Why actually, this seeming arcane, type of approach or overly religious is actually something different that is really necessary.
I think the misunderstanding is that lineage and tradition and ritual is just sort of pressure, judgment, and obligation from dead people that just keeps getting handed down. When lineages are actually alive, what you encounter inside of that traditional teacher, student, and community relationship is a mystery school. Mm-hmm. And it's a system for dissolving block and revealing and remembering who you are, which has to be worked out in relationship because of how we live our lives as humans, and the lineage creates an environment where transmission can occur. And this is probably the most esoteric thing, but when you meet someone who even has a tiny bit more attainment than you, or feels enthusiastic, or has love in their heart, their love, their joy, their experience and state of consciousness is contagious. And so to receive teaching and practices from someone who is even just a little bit more awake than you can have huge paradigm shifting effects on how we experience ourself, our body, mind, energy, and life. And when you step into a lineage, there is initially a process of sort of deconstruction and disassembly that happens when real sadhana starts to happen. When the teacher, the practice, the community, the scripture enkindles this fire of wisdom, the fire of the self inside of you. It lights you on fire in some way, and things have to be burnt. And that process it can be deeply uncomfortable. It can be very destabilizing. We're getting disassembled. Our old thought about what made me has to go. It's a fire sale, you know, everything has to go.
Yeah.
And it can be a very intense and grief-filled process that the teacher and the satsang will hold you through, while all your old conceptions about who you are and what made you you go. I mean, paradoxically too, anything you lose in that process, you eventually gain back, but you hold it a different way, where rather than those ideas, those beliefs, those opinions, those experiences being the defining thing about you, they are, instead of those things defining you, they're tools that you can wield, because what you feel yourself to be is much different than when you walked in. And so you enter into this arena where you can receive grace in a transmission environment and through a lineage, where you can go through a process of disassembly and then sort of remembering and then reassembly. And then you facilitate that process for others as a custodian rather than a consumer. And so, I've made it my business to always try and encounter the people who were direct disciples of Baba Muktananda, which led me to my guru, Swami Shankarananda and Devi Ma Saraswati. And, when I encountered those wisdom teachings, that satsang, it was like adding rocket fuel to my sadhana. That inner process of disassembly and remembering and reassembly became really dynamic. And I needed to be held through it.
It's interesting hearing you talk about this, because it is completely, true that the disassembly is sort of the disassembly and reassembly is necessary. But I can't help but think about your own personal also sequence of all of this and what's happened to you, especially getting stuck in Australia and all this that I want you to speak about. I'm not countering anything you say, but I do know that there are degrees of the intensity of this that people can kind of scale in and out of, because when I imagine when some people hear you describe this, some people are like, absolutely disassemble me. I was in Nepal, I wrote a poem, I was like, burn me up, Vajrayogini, I was ready. Absolutely. I was ready for it, but some people that is really scary. And I guess I just wanted to add, and I know you'll agree that the disassembly can also be very subtle, right? Because you can sort of choose to have the container of your sadhana to be a little more gentle. You
have agency in that process.
Yeah,
yes.
Like you can go to your ayahuasca retreat and try to do 10 years of therapy in one night, or you can go to 10 years of therapy. The process can unfold kind of gently. Sometimes it will be radical, as you're describing, just kind of, due to the grace of the Shakti. And also because I guess in my view, and maybe you'll have some thoughts about this too, when I encounter students, there is this kind of sensitivity around individuals who really experience this profoundly, and they're like, but what about me? Like, I want that. Like, where's my disassembly? Totally. And, so I'm wondering what you think about that just variability of how this unfolds for people.
Yeah, there's a natural organizing intelligence that's inside of these practices that we can have confidence in. And on top of that, when that Shakti meets our karma, a certain amount of burning will happen. For most of us, it's a little bit at a time. But then the heat of that flame, sometimes it dries things out and things catch fire more quickly. And so our sadhana really has to be kind of made to measure. And that's why you kind of need the support of, why I believe if you're doing real robust sadhana, it's useful to have the support of the teacher, the teachings, the community, and the practice. Because that creates a system of support around you. You can't compare your sadhana to anybody else's. That you have to cherish. Swamiji, he gave for a New Year's message one year, he said that for a whole year, our focus was just cherish your awakening. And so at some point, you got a glimpse. Your practice, your asana, your meditation, the psychedelic, whatever it was, it offered you a possibility and it expanded you in some way. And in that seed moment, however subtle or however dramatic, is the energy that can take you the whole way. And we're nourishing that with our practice. We're unfolding that and we're learning to trust in that. But it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. Well, speaking of how it's different for everybody, kind of move towards the end by actually returning a little bit to your story,
Yeah.
because I'm actually just curious how I know the big picture things in terms of you got stuck in Australia, but I'm curious of the more maybe subtle story of the disassembly of when we were together and when we met. You were always talking about this. There was always this tension in you between pursuing, for those who are listening, Nataraj was a choreographer and a quite talented one, had some shows. Was it officially off Broadway?
Yes.
A couple shows off Broadway. I didn't know him when it came out, but of course it was central to who you were, so I've learned all about it. And then, but I also have this piece of me that needs to go be a monk. You know, you were always sort of like struggling with this sort of like this tension inside you. So I'm curious, in terms of the story of your own disassembly, when did this, is this still there? Is it there at all? Has it completely disassembled? How do you feel like your life has been realigned with events of the last 5 years?
Wow. I think what I've realized is I am who I am.
I am who I am.
That's right. I am what I am. I am who I am no matter what I'm wearing or what I'm called. And it actually is really weird. I'm very queer in that way. And it's maybe sort of my Rahu nature, I guess. But that, you know, the etymology of the word weird is actually like 1 foot in and 1 foot out, you know? And so I sort of exist in that weird space where, I mean, that kid, little Jimmy, who tried to take his own life, he hated life. And where I am now as Nataraj, like, I really love life. And so why would I want to renounce life? Why would I want to move away from life? I want to embrace life. I want to become intimate with life. The thing that makes life worth embracing is knowing that divinity is inside of it. And this is the greatest love story of my life. You know, it's me and God, and I am the leading lady of my own life. And so I don't want anything to stand in the way of that. Not organizations, not institutions, not the opinion of society or politics. Like, I'm in hot pursuit, you know? Like, and so that's the thing that I'm building my life around. And whatever is required to be with and near the beloved, that's what I'm going to do. And anything else is really just window dressing. I am so indebted to the people who have shaped that inside of me. My teachers, you know, my enemies, my abusers, my friends, my lovers. Like, it's all part of this rich tapestry that is me. But yeah, I had to be willing to face and feel a lot of things to get to that point of loving life and believing that there was auspiciousness at the heart of reality. Because I had a lot of evidence to prove otherwise. But what I realized through practice and through the guru-disciple relationship and through love of God was that those thoughts actually weren't telling the truth. So, yeah, I think that is something. So I think it's always going to be yes and from me. That there's a time to be a monastic and there is a time to be
a slut,
a whiskey drinker. Yeah, you know, and there's yeah, and totally. It was me. Remember, me and Mary used to always talk about it all the time. We say sluts for God, sluts for God, you know. And, Mary Riley Nichols, you know, great inspiration to both of us. But that's so true. Yeah. It's the people who are having that lover beloved experience of life and the divine, you know, and artists. I think also they don't fit so well in boxes with labels in institutions. And so I'm okay being a bit peculiar. I'm okay being a bit of a weirdo. I'm being very queer in my approach to spirituality and sort of not fitting in anywhere. But that means I can fit in everywhere. And that means I'm free in the truest sense. And that feels much more precious and valuable and honest.
That's beautiful. What a beautiful way to end. Yeah. Yeah, I resonate with so many things you said in my own way. And also, it's funny that I also completely feel misaligned from institutions in some kind of fundamental way, one foot in, one foot out. And I do attribute it to the sort of experience of being queer and the way, totally. And maybe we don't have time for this today, but we can talk about it another time. We'll definitely do it before 10 years are over again. Yeah. But the way in which I've thought for some time now that being queer is actually a spiritual opportunity, and actually I think reality is doing something with queer people, and yes. And the way in which our energy and that spiritual impulse is actually being hijacked by all this bullshit is kind of a sad
Well,
thing.
that process of deconstruction has to happen to a queer person as they grow up, because they don't fit in and they have to examine their values. Most people just inherit values from their parents and their culture, and they never examine them. Yeah. And they operate from that playbook. So some of that work is done for us as queer people, which is fucking great. You know?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you and I are never going to be Ramana Maharshi. We're never going to be Bhagwan Nityananda or Baba Muktananda. We're meant to be Nataraj Chaitanya and Jacob Kyle, and we're meant to be the most Jacob Kyle and Nataraj Chaitanya that we could possibly be. And that's not going to look or feel like or taste like or smell like anybody else. And thank God for that.
I know, but I need to at least get one Sanskrit name so that I can really rise the ranks. I've turned down like 2 opportunities. I'm clearly sabotaging myself. Okay, so this has been really wonderful, Nataraj. It will not take long for us to have you on again. And actually, as I'm trying to do more on the podcast, I like this because I didn't have to read your book. You'll write a book someday, but I know you've written before, but the fact that I don't have to read your book makes it so much easier to sit down and just talk to you, because oftentimes I delay doing Shitheads episodes because of the pressure of reading a book.
That's right. Well, you and I have a shorthand and a wealth of experience to draw from, and a deep love and respect that now has gone decades.
I know, it's crazy. Yeah, but I mean, and what I was going to say there is that I want to have recurring, guests so we can come and talk and have it be more a sort of team of faculty, which brings me to the thing I wanted to point out, and then you can say sort of what's going on separately from this so people can get in touch with you. But I just wanted to tell the listeners that Nataraj and I are Nataraj joined me for the retreat in July, which was amazing and really beautiful, and the Irene Barber said we were the dream team, so just saying. And so I've invited Nataraj to come help teach in Wisdom School and in Sadhana School. So he'll be teaching elements of our new Sadhana School curriculum. We haven't worked it out, but we'll figure it out. That's starting in October 22nd. And then we're completely revamping the Wisdom School in January and introducing what I'm calling, it's sort of my year of pilgrimage. Actually, do you want to just say a couple words about what pilgrimage has meant to you in your life? Because I know you go on pilgrimage at least once a year. You're practically living on pilgrimage in an ashram.
Yeah. Well, the spirit of a yatra, a pilgrimage, is to be a pilgrim. And from the moment you decide to go on a pilgrimage, whatever the attitude of the pilgrim is, whatever arises is the divine. It's part of that journey. So when you set out to see the holy mountain or see the image of the deity in the temple, whatever arises on that journey is part of the tapasya, the austerity, the purification process, and the lila, the play of that deity. And so to live life as a pilgrim, we are journeying, to have that intimate exchange of glances, the darshan of the self, of God, of the goddess. And to do a literal pilgrimage, it puts you in touch with the spirit of being a pilgrim in your life, of holding this idea that whatever arises is her, is the Shakti, is the Devi. And it invokes grace. It's a crucible of transformation, and the journey changes us as much as the destination.
That was perfect. There have been so many moments you say phrases, and I think, okay, book title, article, essay title. I'm logging them all, so I'll check with you to see if I get your go ahead and approval.
You have my
for
full and
using your content.
consent. Yeah.
Well, I'll just
It's a
consider
yes
it's a brainstorming session. I own it. Okay. Thank you so much, Nataraj. How can people get in touch with you? How can people learn more about you? Nataraj has a beautiful voice. He chants kirtan, by the way. So tell people how they can find all that stuff.
Yes, you can find me on natarajchaitanya.com or on Instagram, Nataraj Chaitanya. I have a Patreon that gets updated very chaotically. I work with people in courses, online and in person. This year I'll finish up taking a group of students through deep study and practice of Mahavidya sadhana. I have a Hatha Yoga teacher training coming up next year, several trips to India, all kinds of things. If I have a kirtan album under the title Kula Deva, if you want to listen to that, or just send me a message somehow. You type in Nataraj Chaitanya, there are not very many of us, so
You're based in Melbourne, just so people are aware,
That's
just in
correct.
case the listeners in Australia, they can get to you.
Yes, I want to meet you. I want to be in satsang with you. Let's hang out and do weird stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been so beautiful, and I'm sorry it took so long, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yes, it was great. Yes, and I'm so happy to see how amazing everything has been over the last decade in embodied philosophy. I mean, the journey hasn't been easy, but it's made you into an incredible teacher, manager, scholar, all kinds of things.
Oh, thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. It's been rough. There's been some ups and downs, but it's starting to smooth out now and rebuilding on a thing. Yeah. And I think we're sort of like slowly rebuilding on a much wiser and more kind of conservative in the good sense foundation, and I think that's hopefully going to build us back better over the years to come, hopefully. All right, I have been speaking with Nataraj Chaitanya. Nataraj, thank you so much.
See you soon.